I am on the belief that we need to advocate and educate so that they can also be their own entrepreneur and manager and advocate for themselves. And I think that that's where a lot of entrepreneurs may act differently in the business world.
There's always a turning point, the moment that tries to break you, but ends up launching your destiny. This is Miracle Moment. I'm Ray Ireland, and I'm here to help you rise into the mission God created you for. Let's jump in. Have you ever been challenged by community thinking, I have something that I can share. I know I want to help people. I want to bring people together. I have this idea, but it just feels challenging because of the things, the dynamics, the relationships, the even getting things together, getting them executed. If that's you, then this is going to be an amazing conversation with Rachel Doyon, who is going to be talking about how she's brought different people together from different industries, and what she's been able to create from that has been so cutting edge, so new that she's actually creating a whole new spark in the industry that she's in. So come check out this episode. You're going to love it. Today, we have guest Rachel Doyon here, and she owns a creative agency and artist network. So I'm so excited to bring her on and talk about storytelling and how you share all the clients, how you get the more exposure and visibility. But tell me a little bit more about who you are and how you got to doing this.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to discuss further and see where we can inspire people to tell their own story. But first and foremost, my name, is Rachel. I started Collabarate in 2019. And the ethos was to bring people together so that they could inspire one another to create in real time. Essentially, we focus on multidisciplinary arts. So it's matchmaking a dancer with a painter, a tattoo artist with a mixologist, different types of like dynamic, creative people, bringing them together so they can learn from one another and create more impact in that space. My background is in creative writing, so that's where the storytelling comes into play. And while I was studying at university in New York, I found that it was such a disservice to the creative industries that all the different artists were completely siloed. So if you were studying photography, you were only surrounded by photographers, or if you were studying like sculpture, you were only surrounded by those types of artists. However, at the time I was living with my best friend, and she was also an artist in her own discipline. And we had so much fun, like bouncing around ideas and inspiring one another, especially in those moments of like, burnout, which artists often and creative individuals often face. So we found that our ideas together were always much more inspiring and impactful. And we wanted to develop a community that could come together and experience that as well.
So cool. I went to school in Boston, and I went to school for dance. And that was one of my favorite parts of being in Boston, was that there was so much cross collaboration with other colleges. And like we ended up working with everywhere from like Harvard scientists to music students at some of the music schools or painters. And it was so interesting and so cool. And so I just love your mission and what you're doing. And I think it's super fascinating. And so was there a moment where you kind of realized like, oh, this is really what I'm meant to be doing? And in that moment, was it like super easy the whole time? Or did you feel like, okay, like this is in flow, it's all just synchronistic? Like, what was that journey like for you in starting this?
Well, it was never linear and still isn't. I think if someone told me that my company would look like the way that it looks today, a few years ago, I would at that moment maybe be curious to what that looked like, but it was not what I had envisioned when I first started out. But I would say like at a very young age, I was always really fascinated with the way that people came together and the way that they found, I guess, their purpose and their belonging within those shared communities. Also, my background in like more music and dance, and as mentioned, the creative writing. So I actually ended up minoring in musicology and was able to study the way that different genres of music affect people and the way that their body and mind kind of reacts to those different stylistic genres. And so I was doing like ethnographic research on a very like deep underground culture of different music spaces. And I think that seeing that and seeing the way that it also affects like fashion and other areas of different like industries, like art and tech, there's so much convergence. I found that I wanted to create a space where I could really see that happening in real time, especially coming from my background being in my studies in New York City. There's so much like oversaturation. It's so difficult to kind of become a creative and make money from doing what you love. So we wanted to find a way to just create a platform that not only brought the artists together, brought the artists to the brands and brought the artists to their fans. So it was creating this beautiful ecosystem where it's a win-win for everybody. And that's really the shape that the company started turning that no one could have ever really told me in the beginning. When I first started, it really was this love of events and just bringing people together to celebrate something awesome. But it was when I started getting feedback from the brands and the patrons and how this was giving them something like an act of discovery or an act of just like doing something cool that's different than the usual going out environment and feeling cultured and inspired to talk about that in their workplace. Actually, a lot of our patrons were not typically creative, so that was also a really cool insight. So really bringing together what the artist needs, but also what the fans and the brands need as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that. A lot of times when we're creating podcasts for someone, the client comes to us and they're like, this is who I want to speak to. And it's super clear. And we're like, okay, like let's try that for the first month. And then we'll see who's actually listening on the other
Mm-hmm.
side and what they're liking, because it might end up being that like that episode that you think is going to be the best one that lands so well. Like, what if that one is the one that gets the least amount of listens, and are you okay with that, and are you open to like having guidance to walk you through that, because that's disappointment for anyone and that could totally stop someone in their
Absolutely.
tracks. And being open to that feedback, like what I'm hearing from you, let the company become what it is today now. And how cool to just have that flexibility and just know, okay, this isn't just about me and what I want, but like let's just see what people want
Mhm.
from me, right? So
Absolutely, like the greater mission.
yeah. And so with that, do you have a vision for expansion from here?
Oh, I mean, definitely. For me, I think one of the most exciting parts of being a founder that I've learned to kind of like love is the power of the pivot, right? I love actually seeing where we can adapt and expand and kind of surprise ourselves by studying trends or seeing how the markets are changing. I mean, currently we're living in this really pivotal moment where we have technology like rapidly advancing and creativity and arts and bringing people together in real time is it's more valuable than ever to preserve and actually nurture. So for me, I did have some time to dabble in a bit of the kind of Web3 world and deep tech. And I found myself in that space, I would say, around 2020. And I was able to start then understanding a bit more about like blockchain and crypto and help certain artists within my network develop their first NFT campaigns, which actually provided them more income than they've ever had in their from their music in their whole entire life. Like I'm
Wow.
talking somebody drops, a few songs on chain and they're making $60,000, $100,000, they've never been able to receive
Yeah.
any fraction of that through royalties on, regular streaming platforms. So I think like being a founder who is excited by change and embracing it is something so vital right now. And back to what you said as well, it's like we can't be too attached to our original idea because that could be the make or break it, right? If you get so like, this is the way I need things done, well, at the end of the day, it's not really us doing things. We're just kind of like receiving and expressing in the best way possible. But I don't think we should be so attached because our ideas should be bigger than us and how it's
Mhm.
actually going to be impacting the greater mission.
Yeah, totally. I always say like I have a really deep walk with God in the way that I do entrepreneurship, and my husband and I always check ourselves when we're like setting a goal. We're like, do we think that we can do this? Because if so, like that's not the right goal to go after. We need to go after a goal that like like it can only be God that steps in to like take those steps with us and like cover that gap in like understanding or resource or whatever that like stretches us that far. And I feel like there's just such a difference in a leader when I'm, I get to talk to people all the time with my podcast. It's so fun, but I get to really see like the difference between a leader who's grasping what is new and being cutting edge versus someone who's just recycling and repeating what happened a decade ago. And you can see like a lot of times there's like they're still doing their thing, but there's an energy, like there's a vibrancy that is missing because they aren't standing in the front. And we like to talk about even just like not only like chasing down the front, but actually being the creators at the front of it, and that does come into being an artist, being a creative, being a visionary, someone that's doing something that is actually new and like literally disrupting an industry.
Absolutely. There's always multiple ways to get to a destination. And I think that the most enjoyable way that I found is doing so through co-creation and collaboration. And I think that also yields some of the best rewards, not only for the actual outcome and what that vision might be, but also within yourself, because you learn a lot of how you actually like interact and share and become humbled, and less like, learn how to be the leader and the follower and learn how to delegate. And I think those are skills that are sharpening who you can be as a better, more inspiring leader down the line. And for me, as I was dabbling in the tech space, I was hitting a big resistance of like not wanting to do events within that space. And I was like, what am I bringing to this like new kind of frontier? Like, if it's not events, what is it? Like, where do I still have this like brand that outlives just the way that we began? And it goes back to that community, that kind of that ability to bring people together and co-create. So back to kind of where it all was inspired to then kind of develop. So with me, as I move forward, I'm building a tech product at the moment. So this is definitely something that if you had told me, a creative writer who went to art school in New York, that I would not only start a business, but then start a tech product, I would be like, how? I don't do math. How can I even code? And that's how, that is pure God-given plan, God-given vision. And not only that, it's the fact that when I started Collabarate, it was 2019. So when I tell you that we were able to produce over 30 events in 18 months, that was also the Lord. And in doing so, that is what was able to sustain our brand to today, because with each event, we showcased anywhere between 5 to 20 artists. So that's how the network grew so quickly.
Wow.
And if we didn't have that loyal following and that large network kind of back in our back pocket, ready for action when COVID surpassed and we were able to kind of break way into the new scenes again, then I don't know what Collaborate would look like. And I don't know that I would have had that same drive to continue pushing it forward. And not only that, then shape it into what it then became, which is more like marketing, creative services, brand building. But then now today, like full-fledged tech product that's going to change the way that creatives connect and collaborate all around the world. And leveraging like AI and blockchain technology in ways that are wildly like innovative. So it's really looking at those moments where you feel maybe I don't have any new ideas, or this is really tough, or I feel super alone. Like I also, at the time, both my co-founders that I had started the company with, they left the company. So I was kind of there wondering, well, why am I still holding on? Is it a complete failure? Like, what am I doing with this? But I just couldn't give up. So I think, but there is a difference between not being able to give up and then being too stubborn to adapt. So I think I want to like express that as well. Like you do need to know when to change route and trust that you'll still be able to get to that finish line or whatever that looks like to you, maybe in a different roundabout way that's better than before.
Yeah, absolutely. That like keyword adaptability is so important. So that way you can be seeing, okay, yeah, do I need to pivot? Do I need to do something that's going to make either my life better, my client's life better, the community that I'm serving better? Is there a way to be more efficient, more productive, more impactful, right? And I feel like in our company, we're constantly asking that. And so our company's called Evolve Podcasting. And sometimes like our team laughs because we're like making these little micro pivots all the time. We're like, we are called Evolve Podcasting. So like, if you're part of the
There
team,
you
like
go.
we're going to be encouraging you and like pushing you. And that's just kind of how it goes. But I love how like coming back into that space of community, like community not only creates new innovation, it gives you new ideas that you wouldn't have been able to think of on your own. It also gives you that space to like develop yourself personally, right? Because you go through things
Mhm.
and there's that tension, that buildup, and not all tension is bad. Like a lot of tension that happens in community is
Mhm.
actually super helpful. With that tension, you move forward at the right pace, where someone might be running ahead and then making all these mistakes. The other person's, going too slow, but you put them together, they start going at this like perfect speed, of evolution. And then I think there's also the piece of community where it also locks you into a vision, and as a founder, as a visionary, it's easy to be like, well, let me try this. Let me like do something new and different. But when you actually have that community, whether that be a community of clients, a community of partners, even just your
Mhm.
community of friends and supporters, they're not going to let you down. They're going to be like, hey, like, no, I need you to do your job. Like, you got to step it up. And
Mhm.
so, so many keys there. I'm curious if there's like one story you have that maybe highlights like going through the fire with community. Was there a time that you got
Mhm.
like, tested and really maybe even like didn't want to do community, right? Because I think there's still a little
Mhm.
bit of like residue from the like lockdown and all of that. I know some people, I don't think you and I saw on your Instagram, you're like traveling all around, same with us, right? But there's still people that, have not re-engaged in community yet, and they still feel isolated.
Mhm.
So yeah, curious if if you have a story of like kind of merging through that and kind of coming back to that core thing of like, okay, even if community's hard, even if it's challenging, it's still worth it. If you're loving this conversation and it's sparking something inside of you, maybe it's time to share your own voice with the world. That's exactly why we created the Podcast Accelerator, to help leaders like you go from hidden to heard with a podcast that connects, inspires, and actually grows your business. We launched together in just a few months, and you'll have the system, support, and strategy to keep scaling and growing. Doors are open now, so the link to apply is in the show notes. We cannot wait to see you in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So many things there. And I think I think community can be super challenging. Definitely always worth it. For me, it's always the perspective in which you see any situation. When I moved to Berlin in 2020, it wasn't just that I was like moving during COVID. I was like picking up my life that I had built in New York City for the past 10 years, moving it to a completely foreign country that I didn't really even know all that well, and bringing my company with me during a time that was so uncertain. I really had to kind of find this, like, I guess, like power and strength within myself, of course, through like prayer and, a lot of pep talks to get out there and not only like brave this new culture during a time that was very locked down. I mean, we had curfews at 9 p.m. We could only interact with people outside in the park and like maximum two people. It was very strict. Germany is quite intense with the rule following. So that was a huge arc. And it took me quite some time to find my place in community there. It was definitely a moment, though, that really felt like, okay, even though this might not be comfortable, it's where I need to be. Was when I was selected to do an artist residency at this castle in Poland. And it was that weird time where things were kind of open, but they were like hyper regulated. So everything was capped. There was like only 200 people that could be there. We couldn't be like interacting in groups of more than 10. Everyone had to be checked prior. So it was like a container that was created for us. And the premise was that you would come with an idea, and an idea that you're building from scratch over the course of the next 10 days with whoever you meet on that site. So this was my first kind of like plunge into this, what would be my European creative community. And because had been during COVID times, we actually weren't even able to get there until a few days later. So we only had 7 days to create what it is that we wanted to create. So for me, I had gone in with the idea that I wanted to produce a showcase around the 7 stages of grief, because grief had become quite a big topic of, I guess, something I was like trying to come to terms with, because I had lost my father in 2016. And of course, on a collective level, grief was a very big focus point, given the fact that we were going through a big pandemic and none of us had really faced that ever in the world. It was already a very taboo topic and sensitive topic to bring into a space where I don't know anybody, and a big undertaking to produce this in what would be then 7 days. So I remember this moment actually where I like stepped foot, because you didn't have to produce anything. You could also just enjoy workshops and like listen to music, but that's not my personality. So I was like, am I going to enjoy this? So I ended up going around talking to everybody I possibly could and seeing if they would be interested in joining a production around the 7 stages of grief. So it ended up being my favorite production to date. Honestly, it was so beautiful. It was incredibly moving. I had over 50 artists involved out of the 250 that were there in the first place.
Wow.
And every single performance took place at a different physical stage. So it was like a journey-based production. We had, I would say, consistently around 100 audience members at every stage. And it was formatted in a way where you didn't have to go from one stage to the next if you didn't feel quite ready, because grief is not linear. And it was incredible to see the stories come through in the conversations. I held an awareness team meet up before we did the production to make sure everybody was like feeling comfortable in being a part of this, because it is an intense conversation. And people went around in a circle and started sharing like their motives and what inspired them to be a part of this. And it was just incredibly cathartic. And to give people a platform to talk about something and do it through their art that's not normally talked about was really powerful. And at the end of that, there was definitely some like friction points that had to be discussed in a debrief, just because when you bring artists together and you start kind of running through taking an idea to execution, that's where I think going from artist to entrepreneur has a big shift that a lot of artists don't necessarily always latch onto. So then what happened was all of the artists who at first came together on a collective level, they started expecting me to make sure that everything they needed was provided by me in terms of how their performance, the lighting needed to be perfect, the placements of this and of that. And that's where it's interesting being in the art space, because I feel at that moment, which I ended up, communicating to them, I said, this was a collective experience. You're just as much an artist as I am. You're just as much a producer as I am. And I think that's where just on a societal level, like artists need to be re-educated, because we're not here to necessarily take away artists' power. I am on the belief that we need to advocate and educate so that they can also be their own entrepreneur and manager and advocate for themselves. And I think that that's where a lot of entrepreneurs may act differently in the business world. But because I come from an artist background myself, I understand the way that they operate. So I've been able to really like speak their language and get through what could be moments of friction and discomfort. And there always is in the creative space. I mean, it's a vulnerable practice. So of course you're going to have feelings involved.
Yes, totally. And really like any space, right? Like any space where their heart is in it, like even finance, if their heart is in it, it still ends up being this like vulnerable emotional thing. And oh my gosh, I'm just loving you. You're so amazing. I'm like, we would be best friends if we lived closer. It's so fun. The reason why I even got into business was because I was a touring musician, and I had already gone to school, like did all the things in Boston, New York, like, pretty similar. And then I found out like we had this incredible band, and we were playing on the street corners of the United States, touring around. I'm like, something's off. Like we just went to Boston Conservatory, Berkeley School of Music, like top art schools, and yet we are now on the street corners. Like this is not right. And so I got so like fired up about it that I was like, no one else in the band was like interested. I'm like, all right, I'm going to figure it out. So I like joined marketing courses and business and just like dove into that world. Never in my entire life would have I ever thought of going into business. But it was so amazing that once I got those skills, it actually like refined me as an artist and vice versa. Like you said, it's a different language and you have that creative understanding as well. And I love how you talk about just empowering artists to know that like they are creative, they are an entrepreneur actually. Like I feel like artists are the OG
Absolutely.
entrepreneurs. They just need
Uh-huh.
sometimes support to like understand those other entrepreneurial skills that just can take them so far. I love everything that you just shared in that story. I'm like, I want to be there. Like that is, I would love to be a part of something like that.
So
It's so
cool.
cool.
Yeah, it was. I think that those, whenever the events I've done have that emotional thread, because I've done one as well on the 6 definitions of love, and that's also one of my top fave events, and the only event I've taken on tour. So we had one production in New York as well as Berlin. So maybe 7 Stages of Grief will have some sort of travel debut, but it was just cool because we produced it in a way where you wouldn't imagine how that, like for the Upward Turn, we had like fire performers and contortionists, and then like Pain and Guilt was like this crazy like techno like minimal house set, and then Denial and Bargaining was like stand-up improv. So it was a very cool way to showcase something that's tough to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's just like I think that's why we crave the arts is because we need ways to be able to
Mhm.
express not just through our words, And so like when we're doing podcasting, it's kind of similar to your thing. I never would have thought I would be doing this, but it actually totally makes sense because we're
Mhm.
storytelling and then we get to bring in these other components. The way that my husband and I even got started with some of our like big name clients that we work with was because Sammy was actually their DJ at their events. We both connected from the arts and music space. And they would come to him and be like, "What do you think of my podcast?" And he'd be like, "It's totally boring. Like, it's just like the
Oh,
plainest, most boring show. Like, why isn't there music? Why isn't there like feeling and energy? And like, look at
right.
your image. It's just like totally basic. Like, someone just like plopped it together." And so that's where we get to come in and like bring those creative expressions into like
Mm.
what someone sees immediately. And what we kind of talk about is like an everywhere brand, how to get that everywhere so that way people can see it on all the platforms, in person, live, like all of the things. And it's just such a cool journey to, put something into not just words, but in the music and the full production of a thing to
Mm.
really convey a message. And I think that's where, yeah, obviously you've done such a great job with that, yourself and bringing everyone together. So with everything that you've gone through, we'll kind of wrap up here, but what would be one word that you would say to someone who is maybe like in one of those
Mhm.
pivotal moments? I sometimes call them like a miracle moment where you don't really realize it's a miracle as you're going through it. It might be like actually a really tough situation or something that's has you have resistance around, but
Mhm.
looking back, oh my gosh, that moment changed everything for me and I'm so glad it happened and like there was God all over it. Like, do you have anything
Mm.
you can share in that regards to our listeners?
Well, I will share a story. It's not a personal story, but it's a story that really was a beautiful reminder that I kind of stumbled upon last week. And I've shared it now in 2 meetings. And they're
Awesome.
like, I needed to hear this exactly in this moment. And I think it sheds light to what my one word would be. So
Cool.
the story is of a man who, and I'm sure you've probably heard this story, but it's a good one to freshen up. So we have this man, and he heard from the Lord that he needed to wake up every day and push a giant boulder. So that he does. He wakes up every morning and he pushes and pushes. This boulder is not budging, and he's questioning himself, like, why am I doing this? This is a waste of my time. Like, why would God have me push a boulder for no reason? I could be doing something better or different. But this is not moving. So after 4 weeks, he decides on his own terms that he's done pushing the boulder. This is it. So he goes to sleep that night and he hears from the Lord in dreamland, why did you stop pushing the boulder? And he said, why did you have me push the boulder? Nothing happened. And he says, nothing happened. Look at your body, look at your muscles, look at your mind, look at where you are today and who you are and how different that is to who you were 4 weeks ago. He said, I didn't tell you to move the boulder. I told you to push the boulder. I will move it when it's time. And I think that that is the perfect reminder for any artist, entrepreneur, anybody who has something within their heart deep down that they want to be doing. Just to remember that it just might be preparing you in the season of waiting, or it might be, that pivot that takes you to where you need to go, or taking the plunge. And just, fearlessness and resilience are definitely two of my biggest mottos in life.
That was so good. I love that. I've never heard that. I love it.
I
That's
love that
amazing.
story, right? It's so
Yes.
beautiful.
Yes, and it's so true, and I think that's what makes us all us. And like, gets to a point. Actually, I had one pastor that was saying, he was like, at a certain point I realized, like, oh, God is like giving me these so I can get stronger. And he was in this really crappy situation, but he just had this mind breakthrough where he realized, hey, God's doing this for me. And so he started praying, God, give me more of this, double down on me so I can get even stronger in this season. Give me more. Don't let me get out of this season until I'm totally ready for what you have prepared me for next. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, I was in church. I'm like, wait, I kind of like this, but I kind of don't, because it's like so intense. But like,
it can be.
but and especially when you're in it, right? And you're just like, oh, like, I feel like I got this lesson. Can I just move on? But to really just be in that surrender and be like, thank you, God. Okay, like give me more, because then I know you're gonna slingshot me out of this. So, well,
Exactly.
Rachel, thank you so much for being on here. It was such an amazing time getting to interview you and connect. And I know everyone's going to love this episode. So we'll end here and talk to you guys all soon. Bye. Thanks for listening to Miracle Moment. Share the episode, hit follow, and join us every Thursday for prayer and activation. For more tools to rise into your God-given mission, visit rayireland.com. See you next week.